Hello, friends. Welcome back. It's nice to have you. If you're new here, please subscribe so you don't miss any chapters. Now, on to the story. The next chapter is about Sarah, an independent woman who works for a newspaper. She is single, much to her friends' and family's dismay. What happens when Sarah sees a handsome man chasing a dinosaur in the park? Let's find out. The Adventures of Pandock Island, Chapter 2. Out the window. Tuesdays are always so exhausting, Sarah thought. Mornings are occupied by meeting after meeting, and to-do lists from said meetings fill the afternoons. Sometimes working at a national newspaper can be tedious and exciting at the same time. Sarah sat at her desk and stared out the window. Her office has a lovely view of the park, both a blessing and a curse. Today, the sky was clear and blue. Sarah imagined the feeling of the lush green grass under her bare feet. Water shot up from the fountain as she watched a small bird stopping to drink before flying off again. I wonder where he's going, Sarah thought. Perhaps he is returning to his nest where his wife tends to the little ones. The thought made Sarah smile. Sarah looked back over the park. A man sat on a blanket with a guitar, while a woman sat before him, smiling, enjoying the melody. They look like a lovely couple, Sarah said to herself. Not far away was an older woman sitting alone on a bench. Her face turned to the sky as she closed her eyes, letting the warm sunshine cover her as she breathed the fresh air. See, there is a woman who is happy to be alone, Sarah thought. Sarah is a woman who is content to be alone. Although her friends insist no one is happy alone, pushing her into dating every unattached man they know. Sarah studied the woman a bit longer, until an older man approached her with a lovely flower bouquet. The smile on the woman's face was pure delight as she rose to meet the man and plant a kiss on his lips. So much for that, Sarah muttered. She started to turn back to her work, but caught movement out of the corner of her eye. A gigantic shadow passed by the window. Sarah looked out over the park to investigate and saw the older couple on the path hand in hand, and the younger couple remained on the blanket, her listening to him sing. They seemed oblivious to the giant shadow. There were no clouds in the bright blue sky, and the fountain continued to spout crisp, clear water. I'm seeing things, Sarah said to herself. But just before she turned around again, she saw him. A man was running through the park, looking at the sky. What is he doing? Sarah asked herself. And then she saw it, and she couldn't believe her eyes. What he was chasing. Is that a pterodactyl? It can't be, Sarah said to herself. The only reasonable explanation was work was getting to her. The rest of the park did not react to the man or the beast like they weren't there. How can this be? Sarah asked aloud again to her empty office. It's a man chasing a friggin' dinosaur. Sarah, are you okay? Came from the doorway. Sarah turned to find her boss standing on the other side of the doorframe. "Mr. Whitaker, what do you see out there?" Sarah asked. The man, roughly the same age as her father would have been, peered out the window. Sarah has worked for Mr. Whitaker for several years. She knew his family, and she secretly thought of him as a father figure to her. "It certainly is a beautiful day," Mr. Whitaker replied. "Clear blue sky, people enjoying the park in the sunshine and fresh air. The fountain sure looks clean." Mr. Whitaker didn't mention the dinosaur either. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm sorry. I don't think I am all right. Could I take a couple of personal days, please?" Sarah asked. "Sarah, I can't remember the last time you took a day off. You need to relax and have some fun," Mr. Whitaker said. "Why don't you come to dinner on Saturday with my family? Josh is coming home on leave from the army on Friday, and we're having a welcome home dinner for him. I understand he's also bringing a friend, another young man." Mr. Whitaker winked at Sarah. "Oh, not you too," Sarah whined. "Have you been talking to my mother?" Mr. Whitaker laughed. "Please give your son and his friend my best wishes and welcome home. But I really don't want to be fixed up with a soldier." "Thank you, though," Sarah replied graciously. "Josh will be so disappointed. He wanted the editing team to be there. He likes you guys, you know. We all do," Mr. Whitaker said. "He has definitely been talking to my mother," Sarah thought. "He's laying this guilt trip on thick." "Hey, Amy," Sarah called out to one of her peers walking past her office. "Yes," Amy replied as she entered, her curiosity piqued, seeing the boss in Sarah's office. "Do you want to ride to the Whitakers together on Saturday?" Sarah asked. Amy looked between Sarah and Mr. Whitaker, confusion on her face. "Saturday?" she questioned. "Never mind, it's nothing. Thanks, Amy, you just proved my point here," Sarah said, as she turned her gaze back to her boss. All right, the editing team isn't coming. Yes, Sarah, you can have time off. Why don't you take the rest of the week off to rest and come back refreshed on Monday?" Mr. Whitaker said. "Thank you, sir. I will do that," Sarah replied. She shut down her computer and gathered her jacket and handbag. "Get some rest," Mr. Whitaker said, his tone authoritative, but caring, just as her father used to correct her. "Don't start taking on 100 house projects." "No, sir, I won't," Sarah replied with a chuckle. "I definitely need some rest." Sarah ran to the middle of the park and looked around. Nothing seemed disturbed, and there was no sign of the man or a flying dinosaur. "I'm going crazy," Sarah said aloud. "Talking to yourself in public is usually the first sign," a voice said behind her. Sarah turned around and looked at the man she had seen chasing the dinosaur. Up close, she could see that he was tall, his hair was dark, and he had bright blue eyes, the type of eyes a girl could get lost in for hours. You're here!" Sarah exclaimed. "Yep, I am," the man replied. "Did I see you chasing a dinosaur?" Sarah asked. She knew it sounded crazy, but she already appeared crazy. The man's face went pale. You saw a dinosaur? He asked. You didn't? Sarah looked at the man, completely baffled. You saw what I'm really hoping you didn't see, the man said. Did I see a pterodactyl flying over the park with you chasing it? Yes, Sarah replied. Maybe I'm not so crazy after all, she thought. Did you happen to see which way she went? The man asked. You don't know where she is? Sarah responded. Not exactly, the man said, nervously rubbing the back of his neck. Are you telling me that you not only released a dinosaur in the park, but now it's missing? Sarah asked. Okay, I sound crazy. We both sound completely nuts. I need to sit down. The man grabbed Sarah's arm and led her to a bench where she gratefully sat. Now, did you happen to see which way Becky went? The man asked again. The pterodactyl's name is Becky? Sarah asked with a slight chuckle. Yes, now please, which way did she go? The man was exasperated. That way, I think. Sarah pointed straight ahead. Great. She went home, the man said, looking at the ground. Isn't that a good thing? Sarah asked. Yes, it means she won't terrorize the city, but I can't get home without her, the man said. Plus, her returning without me? Well, there will be consequences. Well, we have buses and taxis. I'm sure you'll make it, Sarah said, thinking he was being a tad dramatic now. No, we're not from here, and I need Becky to get home, the man explained. Am I in one of those prank shows? Are there cameras around here? Sarah looked around for a video crew. Miss, I assure you the situation is very much real, the man replied. So you're from a foreign land where dinosaurs exist? Sarah asked. Not exactly, the man replied. It's an island. Oh, that makes sense, Sarah replied. It does? The man looked at her with amusement. No, that was sarcasm. This situation doesn't make any sense. I only believe you because I just saw a dinosaur. Now, could you please explain what's going on? Sarah could feel her heart beating in her ears. The man sighed. Okay. I'm from Pandock Island. Pandock Island. Should I know where that is? Sarah asked. Probably, if you can see Becky. I'd have her take us there if I knew where she was. The man wasn't making any sense. I'm going to need a little more information, Sarah announced. Right. You're from this world. I have to explain it all, the man said. An explanation would be nice. The man was wearing on Sarah's nerves. First of all, I'm Nick, he said, offering his hand. Sarah, she replied, shaking his offered hand. She felt a spark with his touch, like static electricity, but a pleasant feeling. It's nice to meet you, Sarah. Now, I am not from this world. Well, I used to be, but then I left. Well, I didn't exactly leave. Nick was all over the place with his thoughts. Are you trying to tell me aliens abducted you? Sarah asked. What? No, it wasn't aliens. It was a unicorn, Nick replied. Sarah had heard enough. Nick, it was very nice to meet you. Good luck with getting home. I'm gonna go now. Sarah started to walk away when Nick called after her. Don't you want to know about the dinosaur? Sarah stopped in her tracks. She knew she should walk away from this crazy man, but curiosity got the best of her. Okay, tell me about the dinosaur, Sarah said as she walked back to where Nick was standing. Okay, you see, I used to live here, but then a unicorn showed up one day and brought me to a place called Pandock Island. It's a secret place of mythical creatures, Nick explained. Dinosaurs aren't exactly mythical, Sarah countered. They are when they're alive in the present day, Nick explained. Unicorns, nymphs, mermaids, fairies, witches, and wizards are all real, and so are many other things. They have a safe refuge on Pandock Island. You expect me to believe this? Sarah asked. You just saw a dinosaur in the park, didn't you? Nick countered. He had her there. Go on, Sarah prodded. You see, I used to live right here in the city. I'm a paleontologist. Or I was. The island needs people of this realm to be caretakers of each different species. The dinosaur's caretaker passed away, sadly. I was sure surprised when I was working late one night and a unicorn was standing in front of my car when I left. A unicorn in front of your car. Do you call the car club about that? Do you have unicorn damage written in your insurance policy? Sarah was cracking herself up. You don't have to believe me. It would be better if I showed you, Nick said. Suddenly, the leaves on the trees started to rustle, and a giant pterodactyl landed in front of them. Sarah wanted to run, but Nick grabbed her arm. He won't hurt you, Nick said. I thought it was a she and her name was Becky, Sarah replied. Becky was here earlier. This guy here is Stuart, Nick explained. Hi, Stuart, Sarah stuttered. Nice boy. Stuart shook his gigantic head, making Sarah jump. Come on, Nick laughed, standing up and offering his hand. Where are we going? Sarah asked. Home, Nick replied. You're taking me home on a dinosaur that no one can see? Will it look like I'm flying through the air? What will my neighbors think? Sarah's anxiety was working overtime. No, we're going to my home, Pandock Island, Nick clarified. Sarah looked between Nick and Stuart, an alarmed expression on her face. Aren't you even a little bit curious? Nick smirked and again held out his hand. Had Sarah not seen a giant dinosaur in front of her, she would have run to the nearest police officer she could find to report the crazy man in the park trying to lure people away. But Stuart was in front of her, and she couldn't deny her curiosity. Sarah took Nick's hand, and he helped her onto Stuart's back. The dinosaur sat perfectly still, allowing Sarah to adjust her position. What do I hang on to? Sarah asked, looking around. Me, Nick replied, and hang on tight. Sarah did as Nick instructed and screamed as Stuart took flight. It's okay, I promise, Nick assured. It's freezing up here, Sarah said, feeling the chill of the high altitude and the wind gusting past. Oh, Right, Nick said as he uncurled a swatch of soft fur from the beast's neck. Sarah let go briefly to wrap it around herself before grabbing onto Nick again. It's beautiful up here, Sarah said, looking down over the city. It sure is, Nick replied, completely ignoring the scenery. Sarah's mind was swimming with curiosity about this magical place she was going. She wasn't paying attention to the forest before them until she saw how alarmingly close they were to the trees. "Watch out!" Sarah screamed. There wasn't time for Stuart to fly up higher. They were going to crash. Sarah closed her eyes for the impact, but they didn't crash. Instead, she got a warm feeling and saw bright lights. When she looked again, Sarah didn't recognize where she was. Stuart flew between fluffy clouds where tiny nymphs played. Below them, a herd of unicorns ran through rolling hillsides. Mermaids played in the sea, and a giant castle appeared in the distance. "Stuart, what are you doing? No, not there!" Nick screamed at the beast. What's wrong?" Sarah asked, her anxiety level rising further. Stuart landed on the castle's lawn, and a young woman came outside wearing a sapphire tiara. "Nick, where have you been? Did you let Becky off the island in the middle of the day? She hasn't thoroughly learned to cloak yet. Was she seen? How bad is it?" "I had to send Stuart to come and find you after you lost control of Becky. Is the city okay?" the woman screamed. "Princess, the city is fine, as are Becky and Stuart." Nick gestured over to Stuart, who stretched out a wing, allowing Sarah to climb off his back and onto solid ground. "You brought an outsider?" the princess whispered as she studied Sarah. "She saw Becky," Nick explained, "and Becky learned to cloak last week." "I see," the princess said, smoothing her skirt and gaining her composure. "I apologize for my first impression. I'm Nora, Princess of Pandock Island." The princess extended her hand to shake. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Your Highness." Sarah shook her hand and looked at Nick. "What are your customs? Do I bow or kneel before royalty?" Sarah hissed at Nick, who had turned to tend to Stuart and Becky. "A handshake is fine. We're not that fancy around here. And call me Nora," the princess said. "Thank you, Nora. I'm a bit overwhelmed here," Sarah confessed. "I was too at first. Pandock Island is pretty special," Nora admitted. "I am not sure what I'm doing here," Sarah said, looking back at Nick. "By the looks of it, you're here to distract me so I don't yell at Nick anymore," Nora giggled. "Is he in trouble for having me here?" Sarah asked. "He should be in trouble for neglecting his responsibilities, but if that means he's found another of us, then it's good that you're here," Nora explained. "Another of us? What does that mean?" Sarah asked. "The island only presents itself to those who will not harm it. If it lets you in, then you belong here," Nora said before walking after Nick. Nora talked to Nick a bit longer and then retreated into the castle. "What does that mean, I belong here?" Sarah asked Nick, who was hosing down both dinosaurs and using a large brush that appeared to be a broom. "If you can see the island, and you made it through the barrier of the island, then you belong on the island," Nick explained. "Wait. Did you know I was going to make it to the island before you brought me here?" Sarah asked. "Nope," Nick replied. And you brought me here anyway? Sarah asked, an edge to her voice. Yep, Nick replied. I could have been hurt, or worse, Sarah yelled. She couldn't believe Nick was experimenting with her. Nick stopped what he was doing and took Sarah's hands. I'm glad you weren't, he said, looking into her eyes. Sarah felt the heat rise from her belly and settle onto her cheeks as a bright red blush. Nick noticed as well as he chuckled and looked away. He let go of one of her hands. Come on, I'll show you around, Nick said. Nick led Sarah to another impressive structure behind the castle. He started to open the front door when Sarah put her hand on his arm. Are we allowed to just walk in? She asked. Nick smiled. I sure hope so. It is my house, after all. Oh, Sarah replied and followed him inside. The inside was just as impressive as the outside. Can I get you anything? Water? Soda? A cookie, maybe? Nick smiled. How about just an explanation? Sarah suggested. Right, okay, come sit down. Nick led Sarah to a room with an oversized fluffy couch and a giant TV. They sat on the couch facing each other. Okay, what do you want to know? Nick asked. How about everything? What is this place? What are you? And how did you get here? Sarah had so many questions. Nick patiently told Sarah the island's history as she stared at him in awe. Now, I came here on a unicorn, as I said. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was terrified, but I went to investigate anyway. Lily picked me up and flew me here. She brought me to meet Becky and Stuart, and I immediately bonded with them. I met Prince Ivan and Princess Nora, and they offered me a place to stay. As I mentioned, the previous caretaker had passed away. Things weren't going so well at home, so I thought, what the heck, I'll do it. Soon, I became the dinosaur whisperer. I never left, Nick explained. What about your life back home? Sarah asked. You must have had a home, belongings, a job? I already knew my job was about to lay me off, Nick explained. And it's so much more fun to work with these guys when they're alive. I went back for my clothes and some stuff and stayed here. I see, Sarah said. She couldn't believe this all was starting to make sense. So, what about me? Well, you saw Becky, or maybe she was looking for you. I'm not sure which, Nick explained. So what now? Am I stuck here? Sarah asked. Only if you want to be, Nick replied with a wink. Sarah felt the hot blush burn her cheeks again. I'm sure it's charming to live here, but I have a life back home. I have an important job and a house. Whoa, Nick cut her off. No one said you have to move here. You are welcome to leave any time you want. Becky will take you home. Can I come to visit again? Sarah asked. She already enjoyed the island and hated thinking she'd lose it forever. Humans can come and go with the being from the island. Once Becky leaves, you would need to depend on her returning for you to come back, Nick explained. I see. So you're human then. Is that why you said you couldn't go home without Becky? Sarah asked. Do I look like a dinosaur? Of course I'm human, Nick replied. Are there more dinosaurs? Sarah asked sheepishly. Let's go see, Nick replied, taking her hand. Nick led Sarah outside and blew a whistle. Becky soon landed in front of them. Nick helped Sarah onto her back and then climbed on as well. Soon, Becky was airborne. She landed among a field of rolling hills. Sarah's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets when she saw dinosaurs roaming the mountain. "Whoa, this is insane," Sarah said. Becky lowered her wing and they slid down, just like before. Sarah patted her on her side. Sarah watched as every type of dinosaur she knew roamed the fields in harmony. Younger dinosaurs followed the adults and played in the tall grasses, and the adults walked in pairs. "Incredible, aren't they?" Nick asked, stepping beside Sarah. "Absolutely," Sarah replied. "And you relate to the dinosaurs?" Each species inhabiting the island has a pair or a family of humans protecting them. The island's inhabitants approve of the humans, Nick explained. "So your family cares for the dinosaurs," Sarah observed. She didn't know why her heart sank at the thought that Nick had a wife or family. "Well, so far it's just me," Nick replied. "You don't have a family?" Sarah clarified. "Not yet," Nick replied with a smirk. "I think that's why Becky here took off on me. She was looking for a helper, and she found you." "So Becky thinks I'm your family?" Sarah asked. "Maybe," Nick said. With that thought out in the open, Becky pushed her enormous head into Sarah's back, causing her to crash right into Nick, who caught her with ease. "Whoa," Nick chuckled. "I guess she answered that, didn't she?" "I suppose so," Sarah laughed. Neither she nor Nick let go of the other. Sarah looked up at Nick to find him looking down at her. Their eyes never left each other as he moved closer. Sarah closed her eyes right before his lips gently brushed hers, tingling her entire body. A warm feeling like she'd never had before washed over her. "Wow," Sarah said when they separated. "Wow," Nick repeated. 3 months later, Sarah found herself in a dress shop run by fairies who fit her in a wedding dress. Nick and Sarah moved into the large house between the main town and the fields where the dinosaurs roamed. Becky made sure Sarah got to and from work every day. Sarah kept her job at the newspaper to keep tabs on any unusual activity in the human realm related to Pandock Island. She told her family and friends she was getting married, but no one believed her. They did, however, quit trying to fix her up on dates. "There, that should do it," a fairy touched Sarah's shoulder, turning Sarah around to the mirror. Sarah couldn't believe her eyes. She looked amazing. "Midge, you're magical," Sarah cried. "Comes with the job description," the older woman winked at Sarah. Midge appeared to be a sweet old grandmotherly type, but Sarah had no idea how old she really was. "Just in time, too. Your ride is here," another woman called from the shop lobby. "Becky better not ruin my hair," Sarah exclaimed. "Silly girl," Midge said with a chuckle. "You're taking a car." Sarah looked to see a dark sedan with a driver parked in front of the dress shop. "Is this how you treat everyone getting married here?" Sarah asked in disbelief. "I feel like a princess." "Pandock Island takes care of their own, including our actual princess," Midge winked at Sarah. The fairies escorted Sarah to the car, which wound through the island to get to the castle. A long red carpet led up to the castle entrance, with Stuart and Becky sitting on either side. Sarah gave them each a head pat on her way in, where guards opened huge doors. The red carpet continued into the castle's throne room, where the king and queen sat. Princess Nora and Prince Ivan sat next to them, and at the bottom of the steps stood Nick. Sarah could feel her heartbeat in her ears as she stared at the man she was about to marry. She felt a pinch on her arm and looked at Midge, who winked. "It's real," Midge said, reading Sarah's thoughts. "Are you ready?" "Yes," Sarah replied, and took a deep breath. The fairies escorted her down the aisle, placing her hand into Nick's. Nick and Sarah stood before the king, pledged their loyalty and protection to Pandock Island, and became official inhabitants before Prince Ivan performed the wedding ceremony. "I now pronounce you man and wife and official keepers of Dinosaur Hill," the prince said. Before Ivan finished his thought, Nick grabbed Sarah and kissed her passionately. "You may continue kissing the bride," Ivan said with a chuckle. The entire island came and celebrated before Stuart and Becky took the newlyweds home. Nick took Sarah's hand, helped her off Stuart's back, and led her to the door before scooping her up and carrying her inside. Sarah stood in the middle of their living room and looked around at her new life. Sarah's entire house could have easily fit into the living room of this house, and the dinosaurs playfully romped outside. Sarah was content alone, but now she was happy. "A penny for your thoughts, $5 if I'm in them," Nick said as he stood next to his new bride. "You've been in my thoughts since I saw you out the window," Sarah confessed and kissed her husband. The end. Thank you for joining me tonight. Stay tuned next week for Chapter 3 as we find out how Joni fights against their ancient witch tradition of an arranged marriage in favor of keeping her heart pure for true love. Good night, my friend, and sweet dreams.